They tell you that time heals. They tell you that after 5 years, the constant, jagged edge of grief will soften, turning into a dull ache you can live with. For me, Sarah, a former elementary school teacher living in suburban Connecticut, that pain had the name Ethan, my 3-year-old son who died in his sleep from an undetected heart condition. Dealing with his death had shattered my marriage. My ex-husband, Beverly's son, could only cope by becoming cold and distant. But the sharpest, most relentless barb in my life belonged wholly to my ex-mother-in-law, Beverly, a society fixture and a woman whose empathy tank always read empty. 5 years after Ethan was gone, I thought I was finally making progress. Then, the invitation arrived. It was from Beverly, an email for a pet adoption party, celebrating a new companion. It was classic Beverly, an over-the-top, thinly veiled excuse to debut anything she felt was new and exciting in her life. I almost declined, but my conscience nudged me, professional, quiet attendance. I needed to prove to myself that she held no power over me anymore. The party was exactly the high society circus I expected: designer suits, a wine sommelier, and Beverly holding court in a ridiculous feathered ensemble. The star of the event was in a gilded cage in the living room, a tiny, adorable, fluffy golden retriever puppy. The guests cooed and commented, offering suggestions for names. Beverly, a smirk playing on her lips, quieted everyone with a tapped spoon against her crystal flute. "I need no suggestions, my dears," she announced with tragic pride. "I've chosen the perfect, noble name. The poor little thing has an old soul, deserving of a name I cherish deeply, one that means so much to me in ways that certain people can't appreciate." I watched with dread. Then, she unveiled a custom brass nameplate placed on the puppy's velvet bedding, its polished surface catching the afternoon light, ETHAN. The air left my lungs in a violent expulsion. Not a scream, just a deep, shattering gasp. Ethan. My son's name, the name of my lost little boy who would have turned 8 that October, had been stolen and reassigned to a pet. I looked at Beverly, whose eyes were fixed on my face, waiting for the visible distress she craved. She even had the audacity to lean closer to a woman next to her and whisper loudly, "See? Too sensitive. I told you she was hysterical." I stumbled out of that party not crying, but paralyzed by a white-hot, singular rage. The careful scar tissue of 4 years of therapy was instantly ripped away. By midnight, I was experiencing active post-traumatic stress symptoms. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't be in the dark, and every thought was dominated by the knowledge that this despicable woman was deliberately using my dead child's name for a domestic pet. It was intentional. It was monstrous. I called my ex-husband, hoping that even he would deploy filial duty to stop the insanity. "Your mother's named her puppy Ethan," I managed to say. "Oh, God, not again, Sarah," he sighed, already annoyed. "She's trying to be close to the memory. You two grieve differently. You need to let it go. She's just lonely, and honestly, you're overreacting." That was the last straw. The complicity of his indifference cemented my decision. I needed justice, and Beverly needed consequences so severe they would be irreversible. I immediately called Ms. Davies, a family law attorney known for her ruthlessness and deep understanding of niche, hard-to-prove civil torts. When I finished telling her the story, pausing only to stabilize my breathing, Ms. Davies was silent for a long moment. "It's appalling. But emotionally distressing conduct is challenging to prove. However," she said, tapping her pen, "given the context, your known grief, her repeated attempts to belittle you, the public nature of the naming, and your documented mental health decline afterward, we proceed with a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, IIED." Her behavior was beyond the bounds of human decency. It's what judges call outrageous conduct. We show the court that this wasn't accidental grief, this was a targeted, sadistic attack. The lawsuit dropped on Beverly 2 weeks later. It sought $75,000 in damages, compensating me for the therapy, medication, wages lost from my required sabbatical, and the pain and suffering of a catastrophic, manufactured grief attack. As the paperwork made very clear, Beverly's conduct was emotional theft. Beverly's initial reaction was scorn. She hired an expensive defense team, who immediately hit us with a motion to dismiss, claiming First Amendment rights for pet naming. She thinks this is a silly feud, Ms. Davies smiled. We will show her that the civil calendar is deadly serious. Her defense backfired immediately. Instead of lying low, Beverly went into full martyr mode. She posted pictures of the innocent puppy Ethan on social media, captioned with passive-aggressive shots at me, "Little Ethan and I are having a lovely morning, despite outside haters wanting to cause trouble. Some people just can't move on." I didn't need to gather more evidence. She was producing it for me. I presented photos of the puppy post-dated after the suit, the therapy notes from my PTSD therapist, the testimony of a neutral friend who had witnessed the public taunt, and, crucially, her past toxic emails proving a pattern of emotional abuse during the divorce. The hearing was quietly scheduled in the state's district court, but the sheer absurdity of the cause, the woman who named her dog after her dead grandson, created a media frenzy in our small community. Reporters from local news stations loitered outside, wanting their piece of the story. The climax arrived in the courtroom. It wasn't the fiery display Beverly expected, it was cold and procedural. Ms. Davies laid out the timeline of my grief and the timeline of Beverly's malice, juxtaposing my son's life, loving, tragically short, and the use of his memory, a prop for social validation. The defense painted Beverly as a sweet, lonely woman whose overly sensitive daughter-in-law was trying to extort her. EMTT even testified for his mother, saying I was always hysterical and that she meant well. Then came the closing argument. Ms. Davies stated, "This case isn't about a dog's name. It's about a mother's sacred duty to guard the memory of a child from venom." Mrs. Beverly's surname deliberately weaponized that pain, choosing a name with the full knowledge of the damage it would inflict, solely to spite my client and fulfill her own pathological need for attention. The law calls this outrageous conduct, and justice requires accountability. The judge, stern and unblinking, ended the case swiftly. He entered a judgment in favor of the plaintiff, Sarah, and ordered damages in the amount of $75,000. But the verdict wasn't the public shaming. The shaming came when the judge, overriding his typical neutrality, looked directly at Beverly, whose face was collapsing in real time, and delivered a public, scalding rebuke that was broadcast on local news that very evening. Mrs. Beverly's surname. Your conduct was not merely inconsiderate, it was cold, calculating, and fundamentally inhumane. This court imposes this sum not only to compensate the plaintiff for her severe distress but to condemn the extreme and outrageous nature of your moral malice. A line was crossed, you should be ashamed. The sight of Beverly, once the pillar of her social circle, sitting utterly disgraced while the judge publicly dismantled her character was a priceless vindication. Her expensive suit couldn't hide the truth, she had bought herself $75,000 worth of public scorn. The money meant nothing to me. I immediately used the settlement to establish an anonymous fund supporting families dealing with sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, and to finance my therapy sessions with my PTSD specialist. The healing was slow, but it was real. Beverly's former society friends now avoided her. She was now known not as the Grande Dame but as the woman who stole her dead grandson's name for a little puppy. Her social currency, her most cherished asset, was devalued past the point of recovery. I had been powerless when Ethan died. I was a helpless victim in my former marriage. But when Beverly tried to desecrate his memory, I became an avatar of furious, clinical justice. She thought her malice was free. I taught her that in the eyes of the civil court, emotional theft has a heavy, painful, and very public price tag. My son's memory finally gained the fierce, protected sanctity it deserved.